Let's jump right in. We're looking at one of the most famous figures in world history, Emperor Ashoka. Now, if you're into ancient history, you already know the legend. He ruled over this massive empire, covering most of the Indian subcontinent, and he's celebrated as the ultimate commoner's advocate, a huge patron of Buddhism, and this beacon of hope who proved that even the most vicious conqueror is capable of profound change. But as we know, history is rarely that simple, right? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to dig into the actual historical data, the physical edicts carved in stone, and the ancient texts to uncover the Ashoka enigma. We're going to see how the lines between blood, faith, and political power blur in some pretty fascinating ways. To really understand Ashoka, we have to start at the turning point. I want you to anchor yourselves physically at the bloody banks of the Daya River in modern-day Odisha. The year is 261 BCE. This is the exact site of the Kalinga War. It was an absolutely brutal clash between the expanding Mauryan Empire under Ashoka and the fiercely independent state of Kalinga. The sheer scale of violence here was unimaginable, and it literally altered the political and cultural landscape of the Indian subcontinent forever. 100,000. According to Ashoka's very own rock edicts, that is the number of people who were killed in this war. That's a staggering figure for the ancient world. But the tragedy didn't even stop there. 150,000 more were captured and deported from their homeland, and countless others perished from wounds, disease, and starvation in the aftermath. It's undoubtedly one of the deadliest conflicts in ancient Indian history. So, the crucial question we have to ask ourselves is this: did the bloodiest war in ancient India really create its most peaceful king? I mean, the sheer scale of this violence is the linchpin of literally everything we think we know about Ashoka. But when you start cross-referencing the archaeological evidence with the ancient chronicles, a completely different picture of this monarch begins to emerge. Section 1. The traditional narrative. As the popular story goes, Ashoka was this terrible, violent man who, after the Kalinga War, supposedly walked across the battlefield, gazed upon the dead, and was struck by such overwhelming remorse that he experienced a sudden, total change of heart. He instantly renounced violence, converted to Buddhism, and embraced peace. It's this beautiful, almost cinematic redemptive arc. But let's look at the geopolitical reality on the map of Odisha during the pre-Kalinga War period. Kalinga, which made up present-day Odisha and parts of Andhra Pradesh, was a powerful, independent state right on the fringes of Ashoka's massive Mauryan Empire. Think about its position. An independent Kalinga was a huge problem for Ashoka because it sat directly along the coast, completely threatening the vital communication lines between the Mauryan capital in the north and its holdings in the central Indian peninsula. Ashoka's real motivations show us that Kalinga wasn't just a random target. It was a massive geopolitical threat and a huge economic prize. It had an incredibly sound geographical location, with these highly lucrative maritime trade routes stretching all the way to Southeast Asia. It had crucial ports, a very strong navy, and according to Greek historians from the time, a highly powerful army made up of infantry, cavalry, and war elephants. So conquering Kalinga was a strategic necessity for the empire's security and economic dominance. It definitely wasn't just a blind act of aggression. Section 2. The Dali Hill Mystery. Dali Hill is located right by the Daya River in Odisha, exactly where all this bloodshed happened. Now, logically, if Ashoka was so deeply remorseful about the slaughter he caused here, we'd expect to find his most heartfelt apologies etched right into the stones of this specific region, right? Well, that leads us to a glaring question. Where is the apology? In Ashoka's famous Major Rock Edict 13, found in other parts of the empire, he clearly states his deep regret, talking about how deplorable the slaughter was. Yet, as scholars have pointed out, this famous declaration of remorse is completely missing from Kalinga itself. If you look at Major Rock Edicts 13 found elsewhere, it's just pouring out his sorrow. But when you look at the actual edicts found in modern-day Odisha, specifically at Dali and Jagada, Edicts 11 through 13 are completely skipped. They're replaced by two entirely different edicts that contain purely administrative instructions for his local officials. Just cold, hard bureaucracy. Historians suggest that Ashoka was practical enough to realize that the people whose homeland he had just decimated wouldn't exactly be receptive to a carved apology from the very guy who conquered them. Furthermore, scholars point to some very specific phrasing in his text regarding the conquest, now that it has been done. That specific syntax strongly conveys that the annexation of Kalinga was viewed as a grim duty. It was a necessity for a Mauryan emperor who needed to secure his borders. What this implies is fascinating. Even if he already held peaceful beliefs at the time, he felt a duty to statecraft that simply overrode them, meaning his faith wouldn't have prevented the war anyway. Section 3. unraveling the timeline. If we look closely at our historical sources, the universally accepted timeline completely falls apart. On one side, we have the Ashokan rock edicts, which give us the impression of post-war remorse leading to a commitment to Dhamma. But on the exact opposite side, we have the ancient Sri Lankan Pali chronicles, like the Dipavamsa. These are incredibly important Buddhist texts, and they explicitly state that Ashoka became devoted to Buddhism years before the Kalinga War. In fact, they don't even mention the war as a factor in his conversion. Let's map out the actual evidence-based timeline, because this is where the real plot twist happens. The Pali sources tell us Ashoka converted in the 4th year of his reign. Minor rock edicts prove he had officially adopted Buddhism and committed to its principles around 264 BCE, which is his 6th regnal year. But the Kalinga War didn't happen until his 8th regnal year in 261 BCE. The chronological evidence reveals that his association with the Buddhist faith predated the bloodshed by several years. He was already a practicing Buddhist when he ordered the attack. Let that sink in. Section 4. Master of Ethical Statecraft. So, if he didn't magically transform from a monster into a saint overnight, who exactly was Ashoka? Instead of this simplistic myth, the historical data shows us a ruler who was incredibly complex, highly pragmatic, and, quite frankly, an absolute genius at political strategy. The crucial takeaway here is that adopting Buddhism wasn't just some private spiritual awakening, it was a masterstroke of political expediency. Ashoka ruled over a vast, incredibly diverse empire. Buddhism's emphasis on moral governance, social welfare, and social harmony perfectly solved his need for imperial unity. He seamlessly blended spiritual ideals with the very pragmatic realities of holding a massive empire together. And you can actually see this pragmatic duality in his own words. Even within Edict 13, the very same text where he's expressing deep guilt and remorse over Kalinga, Ashoka simultaneously threatens violence against tribal groups within his empire. He literally warns them that despite his newfound remorse, he still wields the power, and they must submit or face the consequences. He never entirely put down the sword or abandoned the use of force to maintain control. So the implementation of Dhamma was in many ways an unprecedented campaign of imperial propaganda. He carefully, meticulously crafted his public image. He used these massive rock edicts scattered across the subcontinent as an ancient form of mass communication to project himself as a benevolent, highly moral king. He sent emissaries far beyond his borders, replacing military conquest with Dhamma Vijaya, conquest through righteousness. This brilliant move allowed him to expand his influence globally without shedding another drop of blood. Our findings today are probably best summed up by modern scholarly interpretation. Interpreting his Dhamma policy just as a religious act is to underestimate his political genius. Ashoka wasn't just a passive convert who felt bad about a war. He weaponized morality to bring unprecedented stability to one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. As we strip away the myth and look at the real, evidence-based history of Emperor Ashoka, we have to ask ourselves, can a ruler be simultaneously a violent conqueror and a sincere moral reformer? The enigma of Ashoka challenges our modern desire for simple heroes and villains. It reminds us that ancient history is woven from the incredibly complex, often contradictory realities of